In CIST 2531, Chapter 8, we're going to start with looking at distort and liquefying images. You'll see on the screen the Photoshop file for the Charlie and me. So we're going to start by looking at the distort command, because this is one of the commands that's on the transform submenu. So if you go to edit and you come into transform, you'll see that you do have some different commands here, including scale, rotate, skew, distort, perspective. So we're going to look right now at the distort command. So when we apply this command, you have an 8-handle bounding box that's going to appear around your artwork, and you can distort your image by moving any of those 4-corner handles independently. So we'll look first. We'll see that we're on layer 1. Now I'm going to hide these green layer boxes. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these images and we're going to place these on the billboard. So we'll start with the Charlie and me, and I'm going to get my layer orders correct here. I'm going to come into the transform and into distort. And you'll see that I have the bounding box. This allows me to change it up and down. This will allow me to change the sides. So I'm going to place these bounding box into the area that I want the image to be distorted to. This is something that as I move this around, I will have to adjust. Depending on what version of Photoshop you're using, you may have this item popping up. So once I'm done, I'm going to commit, and this is how I can use the distort command by going to edit, transform, distort. And by using the bounding boxes, I can then reposition an image to fit the desired location. So a couple of things I can do with distort. Let me find the project. For example, this welcome. If I wanted the welcome to be written across the building, once again, I can go to edit, transform, distort, and then position this where I want the text to appear. And adjust this so that it appears that it was written on the building. So if I decide I don't like it there and I want to move it to this area over here, I can simply change that by dragging the bounded boxes to the new location. Now, one of the key aspects of using the distort is that you are going to have more patience with this. Once you move one bounded box, when you move the other ones, you may have to go back and readjust to get that exactly how you want it to look in your image. So that's the distort command. Once again, you go to edit, transform, and then distort. All right, so next we're going to look at shadows. Now, shadows are something that's editable. So as soon as you copy and paste one image into another, you should be thinking about where's the light source. What's the shadow going to look like? So we're going to create a simple shadow a couple different ways. Your textbook will have you going into a more in-depth creation of the shadows throughout your projects. So we see got this image of this man. We see this black shadow behind him. We see that it is a different layer. So I'm going to hide that layer. Now, a couple ways I can create shadows. First, by selecting the man layer. I can create a shadow by using the blending options. By coming in and choosing a drop shadow. You can see that I've got a shadow behind him. And we'll put this as normal. And then choosing the distance, I can also adjust the angle for this, the spread, and also the size of the shadow. So I can actually make the shadow more blurry image. Um, one of the advantages of creating a shadow this way is that it is tied to that layer. So once I accept this, once I move this layer, the shadow moves with the layer. So it's going to stay with the same perspective of the lighting source, the size, everything's going to stay the same that I set in my blending options. Now, another way I can create a shadow is by duplicating this layer. So I'll right click and choose duplicate layer. So I'm going to leave this as man copy so we can distinguish between the shadow. Now I'm going to position this to the right. This is going to be my shadow. I'm going to readjust my layers. Once again, I'm going to add the layer styles. I'm going to do a color overlay and I'm going to make it black. The rest of the items I'm going to leave the same. Just my layer properties. Now I do have a little bit more control over as far as the placement of the shadow. You see that it is very dark right now. So I can change the opacity to change the lightness of the shadow. So that's not like just a complete black object behind um, the object. Now there are a couple different shadow categories. The cast shadows, that's when you shine a light directly onto something. And it throws or casts a shadow in the direction completely opposite of the light source. So in this case here, the light would be coming from this man's angle here. We also have touch shadows. That's where the shadows occur at the point where the object makes contact with another object. Which I don't have open, but you guys will be working through this with a waitress project. But for example, if I wanted the shadow to start from where it touches, his foot is touching. So one of the ways I could do this is by using the distort command. And adjusting this to where it falls from the where he's touching. I know this is not very precise right now. We also have secondary shadows. That's the shadow that occurs when two or more light sources. So you're going to see these more often when you have natural light coming from a window. And you have other lights coming from an artificial source, such as a lamp or TV. So in this case, you see two shadows moving in two different directions, and usually one is darker than the other. Now, we will get into more. This, like I said, this is a simple shadow where we just copied it, filled it with black, and changed the opacity. You will have complex shadows that you'll work with in Photoshop. This may be something where the shadows aren't the same size, maybe two different shapes, or maybe something that is really difficult to recreate with a brush tool. You'll see that in your textbook with a glass. Another thing you'll work on is changing the perspective of a shadow, distorting and positioning the shadows. For example, you'll be working with to where the shadow changes the settings here, the perspective. You'll be distorting shadow so it casts on a wall and the floor. One of the other tools you'll be working with is the liquefying tool. Now, liquefying tool, it's a powerful filter. It's used to store images in a lot of different ways. And there are their own sets of tools for a liquefied image. So we're going to look at this photo of this man. And to get to your liquefy filter, you're going to go to filter and then come down to liquefy. This is going to open up your dialog box for the liquefy. And we'll look at some of the different um, tools you have here. So you have your own set of tools for the liquefy. You have your forward warp tool, because it's kind of like our smudge tool. So when you drag the forward warp tool over an area, it's going to move those pixels in the area you're dragging. So you'll see here when I use the forward warp tool and I click and drag, it's going to drag those pixels over that image. Now the reconstruct tool, this is like an undo. So this is going to let me to revert these images back the way it was. So when I paint with this reconstruct tool, and you see over here, I do have options on the size, on the side here. So I'm going to adjust the size of this. And you'll see that when I adjust, just by clicking and holding the mouse button down, my image is reverting back to fix any of the changes I've made using the liquefy tool. The twirl clockwise, we do have a smooth tool, which will smooth out areas. Let me see if I can adjust these to extreme settings. So the twirl clockwise tool, as you see, it will adjust and twirl these images, these pixels, clockwise from the center of the brush. It's going to create a whirlpool effect. The pucker tool, this is going to draw all of the pixels inwards. As you see, that is also drawing the pixels along the side of the image. Everything's being drawn towards the center of this image. The bloat tool is going to be just the opposite, because the bloat tool is the opposite of this pucker tool. It's going to push all of these pixels away from the center. So let me put this to some extremes. And you'll see the bloat tool, it's pushing all of those pixels away from the center. Now, a couple other things here. I'm going to go back to this image here. And you notice that nothing was committed. None of my changes took place until I hit commit. We also have a push left tool, which is going to push the pixels left. You'll see also you have a freeze mask tool and a thaw mask tool. So what the freeze mask tool does is that's going to freeze the area. So we're going to paint an area. For example, this guy's eyebrows. We're not going to change his eyebrows. So this is going to lock that area in. So any changes I make is not going to affect the area that is painted. Now, that is the area that is frozen. Now, over to the right, you will see that you have some options for the mask options. Um, where you can change the mask. For example, if you want to change the different color of the mask, these options are located here as well. Now, the thaw mask tool does the exact opposite. It frees that area that's frozen. So now we can make changes to that area as well. Restore this guy. Because now we're going to look at the face tool. Okay, so the face tool, it recognizes facial features and head shapes. This face tool is going to place shapes and handles around different facial features. And it allows you to drag those handles and make precise distortions. So we'll choose the face tool, and we'll see that we do have the lines around the face. And we move over certain parts of the face, we'll see that we do have other options. Now you'll see over in your option panels here, you can adjust these by doing the sliders as well. So let's say we want this guy to actually smile. So I can come over and adjust the slider. And we can see that we can make this image smile. We can also take it the other way. So I'm going to set him back at 0. I can adjust his upper lip, his lower lips. I can also adjust the width of his mouth and the height of the mouth. And the mouth is not the only thing you can work with. You can work with everything here. So you see I've got his face. Select here. I can adjust the forehead as well as the chin and the cheeks. So I can make his face thicker, thinner. With his eyes, I can make the eyes bigger, smaller. I can open and change the height of the eyes. Same with the nose. I can make the nose shorter, make it longer. I can also adjust the width of the nose. So this Liquify tool does give you a lot of powerful options to where you can actually make someone that looks like this by adjusting the face options. We can really change this. And you also see over in the options here, you have the left and right eyes that you can work with. So we're going to change the left eye, all the negatives, right eye, all the positive hundreds. We adjust the distance between the eyes. So you can see we already have just made a drastic difference in the way this guy looks. Make him a higher forehead. So as you can see, we can really change the way someone looks by using the Liquify tool. This is a powerful tool in Photoshop that should be used very cautiously. Next, we're going to look at the Puppet Warp tool. So the Puppet Warp tool, it's a transform command that allows you to modify targeted artwork. It gives you a high degree of control when distorting your artwork. So what this does, it creates a mesh over your artwork. You're going to interact that with the mesh by placing pins on a mesh grid. Now the pins function like handles. It gives you control of what parts of the mesh move and what parts remain static. So we'll start by going to edit, and we'll come down to Puppet Warp. You see we have the mesh placed over. You see that our mouse pointer has now changed when we go over the mesh to the pins. And simply by clicking, we can add pins into our image. Now you do have some options for this. You do have a mode that you can set. You got three options here. You got rigid, normal, and distort. So default's going to be normal. The rigid setting causes the mesh to move with less ease, while um, the distort setting moves the mesh more fluidly and it dramatically distorts the artwork. Next to this, you have density. This setting determines the spacing of the mesh points. So we can choose fewer points or more points or normal. Next, we have expansion. So this expands or contrasts the outer edges of the mesh. Now, you want to use this when the choice for whether or not to warp edges is a factor in the transformation. Now, when you use a negative value, it contracts the mesh and leaves the edges unaffected. If you only want to see the pins, you can choose the show mesh and deselect it, and you'll only see the pins. If you want to remove a pin, you select it and hit delete on your keyboard, and that will remove the pins. You also have the option to remove all pins, to clear all pins from the mesh. Which is located right here. This was also your cancel this. You don't want to use the puppet warp after all, and this will accept any of the changes. So let's look at what the puppet warp does. So if I want to change this guy's head and bend it, I've placed pins, and I move my mouse pointer to select that last pin, and you can see that in this case I've changed the swan's head to look more downward. You can also use this to make it look more upwards. Going back to this guy, show you how these look on a human. And this is not going to be very precise. You can see how I can use this to change the pose. Um, so those are just a couple things you can do with the Puppet Warp. You can use it to change how your image looks.